Welcome to Powered by Ancestry. I am Kwesi Kunadu, your guide and host. On this episode, our topic will be climate change and ancestry. And once more, you're probably scratching your head wondering, suspiciously perhaps, what is the connection between climate change and ancestry? That seems much too far apart, but I have a surprise for you. There is a very deep and intimate connection between what's being referred to as climate change and ancestry. Climate change is happening all around us, or at least that's what some would like us to believe. And I want you to underscore the word belief. You see, the climate is always changing, and has always been changing. That's what the earth and the universe does. It's always in motion. The rivers are flowing, they embank, they provide rich topsoil, tectonic plate movement, volcanic eruptions, thunderstorms, typhoons, tornadoes. These are all features of the natural world that are always in flux and are always shifting. So when you hear or read or see talk of climate change, I want you to step back a moment and consider this. If the climate is always changing, then what is the meaning of climate change? Is it simply a cute buzzword for environmentalists? Is it simply something for what some people refer to as wokeism? Is it something simply for the now? Well, I want to suggest two things. First, the fact that the climate is always changing is something very important to us to always keep in mind. Because we human beings are not aquatic creatures. We don't live in the sea or ocean or river. Neither are we aerial. We don't live in. Climate changing is a natural, ongoing, perpetual feature of our planet. But climate change is also secondarily an industry, meaning you have climate scientists, climate activists, climate corporations who are engaging in climate-friendly policies. You have climate deniers, and you have climate advocates. You have climate policies. So what I'm suggesting is that there's an industry here. There's money to be made on climate change. And so as the companies that are pushing electric vehicles, electric stoves in New York City and elsewhere across the country, and moving away from gasoline, is this simply because gasoline or petroleum is unhealthy? Or is it that the new technologies that are powered by electricity, primarily or principally, require an infrastructure and require a consumer base to make it sustainable? Think about that. Think about the last 200 years where we have climate data about tropical storms, at least for the Americas and particularly the Caribbean. As some of you may know, all tropical storms begin off the coast of Western Africa. And they follow this sort of canary current that runs into the Atlantic. And that tropical storm usually passes through the islands of Haiti and Dominican Republic. And then, of course, it passes over the Bahama Islands, Cuba, north of Jamaica. Then it hits Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas. It'll pass by New Jersey, New York, and then it'll head straight out into the British Isles. And it dies and fizzles out there. That's the pathway. So we have data for these tropical storms for the last 200 years. The data is pretty consistent. These storms follow that same pathway and trajectory without fail. However, in the last few decades, some of these tropical storms have become much more severe. Is that because of climate change? I want to suggest a different view. Rather than climate change, since the climate is always changing, and make climate change as a concept of oxymoron, I want to think about it through ancestry. You see, those same path of tropical storms are the same path of slave ships. The exact same path. And so those pathways leaving Western Africa, greater Western Africa, crossing the Atlantic, heading the Caribbean basin, and then of course hitting what was then, and perhaps now, the markets within the United States, in the US South and of course in the US North, along the Atlantic seaboard or the East Coast. And then of course heading to where? England. In the 18th century, England was the most profitable, most wealthiest, and the most dominant force in transatlantic slaving. That's not an accident. 6.6% of all slaving vessels were British vessels in that century. Just to give you an idea of how much of a power position Britain had within the 18th century transatlantic slaving. And all those vessels crossed where? The Atlantic Ocean, using the same pathways as those tropical storms. So what I want to poke at, what I want to suggest is that perhaps it's not climate change that's whipping up these severe storms that have these sometimes idiotic names, but in fact, it's the stirring up of ancestral forces in those waters. Remember, there are millions of bones of Africans that line the Atlantic Ocean along those same pathways. And these bones are perhaps speaking. They're saying something to us. What exactly are they saying and getting at? That's another time, another discussion. But in short, what I want to suggest is that these natural phenomena are forces of nature. And guess what? Ancestors are also what? Forces of nature. And so you have here a synergy between force of nature that once lived a human experience, that returns back to nature, and you have other forces of nature latent, that is within these systems of ocean winds and trade winds and currents that are now being stirred up. Why are they being stirred up? And then you might say, well, that's only for tropical storms. Well, think about these forest fires. California, elsewhere, they're much more intense. What would happen in California? There's a history there of what? Quasi-enslavement. With whom? Non-white peoples. Chicanos, Mexicanos, Chinese, Africans. And so, is it surprising that the places that are experiencing these severe droughts, these intense oceanic supplied storms, these tornadoes in the Midwest did not escape slavery. These trails of tears are uprooting indigenous peoples from their lands. The Midwest did not escape, nor is it immune from the land grab and theft and destruction of human life from indigenous peoples. Perhaps, just perhaps, these collections of tornadoes and intense forest fires and tropical storms and other kinds of related phenomena are not simply a function of the earth losing its mind, but ancestors that are essentially seeking some form of retribution. Not reparations, retribution. Justice, if you will. To say that this land is not yours. This world is not yours. To those who claim to be the owners of this world. Those who claim to be in power in this world. It's not yours. It belongs to us. The features and forces of nature. And therefore, climate change industry is trying to make us believe or think otherwise. That it is human action that's causing these features of the landscape and these natural phenomena that have lost their minds, supposedly. The climate industry is full of contradictions to show that, in fact, it's an industry. So many of these celebrity environmentalists, they fly on private jets, polluting the air and our ozone and our lives even more. These are the ones who order many of their products on Amazon that provides for more trucks on the road, more cardboard, more containers, more landfills. And these environmentalists have found a way to make big money off of the idea of climate change. Not only they, the politicians, they have found ways to monetize climate change as a policy, but also as a money-generating practice. Do you think that electric vehicles are new? They're not. They've been in the scene for the last 30, 40 years. It's only now that the infrastructure is there where they can make money, and hence the push towards EVs or electric vehicles. Again, what I'm suggesting here is that there's a political economy. There's an economic motive around climate change. But what I also want to suggest to you to consider is that there's also an ancestral dimension to all this. If, once more, the climate is always changing, that means climate change is really a moot fact. It's a fiction. That climate change is really the ancestors' way of communicating to us that we don't own this world. We don't own this earth. We simply are occupants. We're renters. And maybe it's time as renters, our renters do. Because the earth doesn't need us human beings on it for it to survive. It doesn't. And the climate industry wants to believe that we human beings have that power. That the earth needs to be saved by us. If you think about it, how ludicrous is that? That this gigantic and organic and automated unit in the universe needs human beings in order to survive. Think about how arrogant and asinine that argument is. The earth doesn't need us. The Earth will survive with or without human beings. And if you agree with that argument, then therefore, the climate industry is really just another fiction. Human beings perhaps are not having this great outsized impact as is being suggested. That the Earth is just doing its thing. It's cleansing. It is purging. You see, the Earth has a mirror to our bodies. And our bodies, like the Earth, which comes from the Earth and will go back to the Earth, has a process of cleansing and purging to rid itself of toxins and waste, but also to what? To renew itself for its own survival and thriving. And the ancestors are indicators. They are barometers. They are the real forecast of these ongoing changes or transformations within our natural world. It is quite possible that the argument made by the climate industry is not so. Humans are not having it. It's impossible to have this great impact on something for which they neither own nor control, which is the Earth. And secondly, that the ancestors may be right here, that they're showing themselves through these intense forest fires, these floods, these droughts, and tropical storms is their way of saying, we're in control here. The Earth is not yours. It's ours. And we will reclaim it through an act of purging. Remember, the way you clear a forest or a farm is to burn it out. And that allows for new growth, new life. Flooding is a form of purging. Just like you fasting in water or liquids, a form of purging. Again, we don't know for certain what the purging and cleansing is for, but we know it's happening. Especially when you think about climate change from the perspective of ancestry. I am Kwesi Kunadu. I've been your guide for Powered by Ancestry episode. Please submit your comments or questions or ideas for other episodes. Until next time, stay well.